Angela, let's start with you, shall we? So do you really think people should have to turn off their heating in the winter to help the government?
No, is the answer. People shouldn't have to do that to help the government. I think the question is actually much broader than that. And we've never really got to any sort of state in this country yet in which the plan for how we reduce carbon, how we get to net zero is actually going to take place, how much it's going to cost, and who's going to pay for it. So right now, we still sort of sit around in a situation where there's a broad support for net zero, as long as it doesn't actually impact our lives and it doesn't cost us any money. Now, those three things are completely and utterly incompatible. And until there is, as I say, a willingness from all political parties to address those points, we will just limp from one stage to another stage. We'll have, one big objection to wind farms over there, another big objection to putting in nuclear power there, another big objection to increase in our bills. So I think it is, as it has been for so long, just a whole question of the high-level policy and vision thing, but no reality of how to get there at all.
All right, Angela, so but do you think, though, we should in some way be prepared to compromise?
Well, I think that we inevitably are going to... We're inevitably going to have to compromise. Either we compromise, and it's going to be a compromise in one way or another, colder houses, pay more money, increase taxes, accept big infrastructure on a doorstep, or all of that lot. Either we're going to compromise in there, or you can't meet your climate change targets. It's absolutely straightforward. I do think that in the end, people will accept some form of a compromise, yes. What that compromise is can only be clear if there's proper discussions out there and if there's a getting away from just making statements without filling in the detail underneath. Policy details are always difficult because they always are challenging. There's no such thing as an unchallenging policy. And that's one of the reasons why people move away from it, policymakers move away from it. And in this particular instance, many statements have been made by all political parties and indeed by the Climate Change Committee itself without really getting into the detail of what it means and what it's going to cost individuals and what indeed it's going to cost the country.
Yeah, but people don't... and Andrew, we'll get to you in just a sec, I promise. I just want to say, Angela, and I'm not having a go, but, so asking people to compromise is very hard, isn't it? And
yes.
We can't help but notice we can't help but notice you're in the Alps and you probably haven't walked there.
No, you're dead right. I haven't walked there. Also, it's absolutely pouring with rain, by the way. It's much better weather in the UK than it is here. Often the Alps is really nice in summer, but I can't even see an Alp, by the way, out of the window. And there again, you have a big point. How did I get here? Mixture of plane and car. We discuss at length the use of electric vehicles. I suspect, actually, that electric vehicles can only be an interim to something else, maybe hydrogen, because with electric vehicles, the actual overall cost of building an electric vehicle is pretty heavy on a whole number of environmental issues, as does when you have to dispose of things like the batteries. So, yes, compromise is inevitably going to be there, or we have to change the targets. It's one or the other. Right now, if the population wishes to stick with the targets, they've got to accept the compromises. And I think policymakers have to say what those compromises are. The Climate Committee has actually a positive part to play in setting out those compromises. We can either say, what a load of rubbish they're talking today about having to heat your houses in the afternoon, turn down the temperatures or whatever. Or we say, OK, that is one of the compromises. Are we prepared to accept that or not? And as I say, you can't get to a net zero target without accepting compromises. So let's talk about those, or let's ditch or shift the targets. I think it's one or the other.
OK, Andrew, let's put that over to you, shall we? Do we have to compromise or do we have to change the target?
Yeah, I think Angela made quite an interesting point that we actually need to step back a bit from the nitty gritty. I'm just not sure that she stepped back far enough, because there is a broader question than, if you like, the engineering questions around the net zero target. There is the question of whether the targets themselves are sensible. And the answer to that is that they're clearly not. It is clearly costing us much more to address global warming than the harm that global warming is supposed to cause us. I've seen one paper which analysed the cost of decarbonising the electricity system so far, and it's about twice as expensive as the damage that global warming is alleged to cause. So the policies are clearly irrational. So the answer to your question is, yeah, we need to look at the targets and just say, is this sane? And clearly they're not. I think people don't realize how much compromise is going to be required. These things of preheating your house so that the grid doesn't have to use so much power during the evening peak is a small element of it. But the thing people have to understand is that is only going to address the problem in a minor way. The big problem is we're putting in all these renewables, but we don't have any way to balance the grid when the wind isn't blowing. There is no technology that is even close to being ready to deal with that. I mean, Angela mentioned hydrogen. Hydrogen is incredibly inefficient. You put in, a megawatt hour of electricity into your hydrogen system, if you like. You make hydrogen from it, and you get very little electricity back out of it once it's come out of the store. It's a hugely inefficient process, which means hugely expensive electricity. People just aren't going to be able to afford to heat their homes, when the wind isn't blowing, because you're not going to be asked whether you want to turn off your power. You're going to be, first of all, they're going to offer to pay you to turn off your power. But if not enough people take up the offer, then they are just going to switch you off. All your smart meters are connected, if you like, to central authority, which can say, okay, the choice is major blackouts, or we will just switch off people's fridges, switch off their EV chargers, switch off their central heating, and you just won't be asked at all. That's the world we're heading to, because policy has been driven by, if you like, virtue signaling. Politicians are quite clear about this. They say we're doing this to lead the way, because it's quite common knowledge now, if you like, that the UK emits very little of the world's carbon. We're 1% of carbon emissions. So if we completely decarbonize, it makes virtually no difference at all. And politicians say we should show other people the way. So this is a virtue signaling exercise for politicians. And all this pain that you are feeling now, and it's costing people a lot of money now, and all the pain that they're going to feel in the future, this is really just to make politicians feel good about themselves. It's a very sad state of affairs.
Well, Angela, let's put that to you. Is this just virtue signalling?
Oh, I think a lot of it is. I think that's where it all started. And I think sort of emotion, dare I say it, because I don't think anybody really thought through what are the costs and the consequences of high-level decisions and pronouncements that were being made. I think we're all actually in very similar positions over this. Let me just pick up the hydrogen question, if I may. I entirely agree with the hydrogen question. I was talking about hydrogen in cars, not hydrogen for generating electricity for the grid. And I'm one of those, actually, who believes that small-scale nuclear reactors is absolutely the way this country should go, regardless. It gives us an energy security that is very important for us. And I think will get even more important, because as the world takes a different view to globalization, and it takes a different view generally, especially in Europe, as to how it generates electricity and what it does about gas, unless we have a greater degree of self-sufficiency than we have on something that is absolutely reliable, which wind, of course, is not, then we will have the problems that have just been outlined of finding ourselves without power at certain times of the day, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. I have a son. One of my sons lives in Spain, albeit he lives in a part of a reasonably rural, not terribly rural, but reasonably rural part of Spain, and that is exactly what they have. They run out of electricity in Spain from time to time, and he will be perfectly, normal day, and suddenly find that they have no power whatsoever. And so he's looking at a greater degree of self-sufficiency for that particular reason. And our natural resources and self-sufficiency is generally a very important attention that now governments of all political persuasions need to pay attention to, along with reasonableness. And that is exactly where I think we all agree. What is it that we can reasonably expect to do? Should we reasonably look at making sure that we operate in a sustainable and use renewable way? And I think the answer to that is yes, but the emphasis is on reasonable costs, reasonable timescale, reasonable expectations, reasonable views of who pays what. And it sounds so boring to say, let's be reasonable. So it sounds much better to say, let's do X or let's do Y.
Yeah, well, look,
reasonable is where we should all be.
We've got to leave it there, but good to talk to you both.